Chapter 2, The Origins of American Government. Prelude, Sources of Democratic Ideals. Hammurabi. The sixth king of Babylon, Hammurabi, formed one of the earliest law codes, Hammurabi's Code. It is considered to be similar in many ways to a constitution. Now, Hammurabi ruled over Babylon, which is what we now know today as basically the area of Baghdad in ancient Mesopotamia, which is where Iraq is located. Now we move into section 1 and look at the Greek roots of democracy. The geography of Greece influenced its centers of power. People lived either in mountain valleys or on islands forming city-states. A city-state is a small political unit featuring a city in the surrounding lands. The Greeks developed a unique version of the city-state called the polis. Typical Greek cities were built on two levels. The Acropolis was located at the top of a hill with temples dedicated to the gods and goddesses. On the flatland below was the walled city with its homes, markets, theaters, and other public buildings. The city-states were fairly small, giving citizens a sense of responsibility for the successes and failures of the city-state. Monarchies. A king ruled the polis at first. The nobles, or landowners, gained power as the defenders of the polis. The nobles were the only people who could afford the bronze weapons of the time, and they usually defended the king, but they also won power for themselves. A new middle class emerged thanks to trade, and they began to challenge for power. Iron weapons became available by 650 BC, making it easy for the middle class to afford weapons. This helped break down many barriers because now the defenders didn't have to be the nobles. And the phalanx was a massive formation of heavily armed soldiers that became a common battle tactic. The use of these tactics seemed to reduce class differences. Sparta, a nation of soldiers. The city-state of Sparta was located in the Peloponnesus, a near island, in the southern part of Greece. The Spartans transferred themselves into a military state where boys began military training at the age of 7. Athens. In the city-state of Athens, democracy, or government by the people, first took root. Originally ruled by a monarch, the noble landowners gained power by around 700 BC. In 594 BC, Solon was a wise ruler who brought many reforms. In 507, Cleisthenes set up the Council of 500, which prepared laws for the assembly and ran the day-to-day work of the government. The Persian Wars. Athens emerged as the wealthiest city-state by about 500 BC. Soon, Athens and other city-states would face a threat from the Persians. In 490 BC, the Persian army landed at Marathon, north of Athens. The Athenian forces forced the Persians to retreat. In 481 BC, Xerxes gathered together an army of 150,000 men and a navy of 600 ships to defeat all of Greece. Sparta and other Greek city-states joined Athens in fighting the invading army. The Greeks eventually defeated the Persians. The Age of Pericles, from 460 to 429 BC. After the Persian Wars, Athens emerged as the most powerful city-state. Under the leadership of Pericles, democracy flourished, and Athens practiced direct democracy. The Athenian assembly met several times a month, and at least 6,000 members had to be present to conduct business. That's called a quorum, or a minimum number that had to be there. And of course, that's a very large quorum. At least 6,000 members had to be present. Also under Pericles, Athenians began serving on juries. A jury is a panel of citizens that make the final judgment in a trial. Pericles' funeral oration. In one of the earliest and greatest expressions of the ideals of democracy, Pericles gave an oration or speech after the funerals of Athenians slain in battle, and it has become known as Pericles' funeral oration. The Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War was a power struggle between Athens and Sparta. After 27 years, Sparta prevailed and democracy decreased in Athens after the war. And now we begin to look at the Greek philosophers. Philosophy, or love of wisdom, refers to an organized system of rational thought. Early Greek philosophers were concerned with the nature of the universe. Three of the greatest philosophers of the Western world are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So here we have a look at Socrates. Socrates developed the Socratic method, a technique of leading students to knowledge through questioning. So we all, no doubt, have seen this. As a teacher, I've used it. There are times when I may ask a question and get you to respond, and when you respond, you discover that you really kind of knew the answer all along. You found knowledge within yourself. And that's the Socratic method that was developed by Socrates. He believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth and was put on trial and executed. Plato, a student of Socrates, is considered by many to be the greatest Western philosopher. He expressed his views of government in the Republic. Plato also believed that people could not achieve a good life unless they lived in a just and rational state. According to Plato, the ideal state has three groups: rulers, warriors, and commoners. Men and women would have the same education and equal access to all positions. The rulers would be philosopher kings. Plato started a school in Athens called the Academy. Aristotle was a student at the Academy for 20 years and became Plato's most important pupil. Aristotle believed in three rational forms of government: monarchy, aristocracy, and constitutional government. He preferred constitutional government. Now we move into the Roman civilization. The Roman Republic. The Roman Republic was governed by a constitution which focused on the principles of separation of powers and checks and balances. The constitution was influenced by the struggle between the aristocracy, the patricians, and other Romans who were not wealthy, the plebeians. Only the patricians could hold public office. The Republic was governed by two consuls who would lead the army into battle. Civil law, the law as it applied to citizens, was overseen by a praetor. Eventually, another praetor was added to oversee the law as it applies to non-citizens. The Roman Senate. Originally, the Senate served as an advisory panel, and it consisted of about 300 patricians. But by the 3rd century BC, the Senate had the power of law. Tribunes of the plebs. Conflict between the patricians and the plebeians led to the development of the tribunes of the plebs to protect the plebeians in 471 BC. The equality of all Roman citizens was an ideal that was never achieved. By 287 BC, all were equal according to law, but a select group of patricians and plebeians controlled political offices. Roman law. One of Rome's greatest contributions to Western government was its legal system. The 12 Tables was Rome's first legal code. Some of the concepts of the Roman legal system that have survived into modern legal systems include the presumption of innocence and the rights of the accused to defend themselves. Justinian's Code. The Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, survived after the Western Empire collapsed. Under Justinian, who ruled from 527 to 565 AD, the Roman law code was reformed, and he set up a body of civil law that became known as Justinian's Code. It has had an impact on international law today. Now we'll look at the principles of Judaism and Christianity. The Ten Commandments. According to the Scriptures, God gave the Ten Commandments directly to Moses on Mount Sinai. The commandments contained basic moral laws, such as you shall not murder, honor your father and mother, and you shall not steal. Christianity's appeal. Christianity flourished despite the persecution, largely because it was more personal than other Roman religion. Now, it's important to note here, because I'm kind of skipping ahead here, maybe leaving out some details, but Judaism was a popular faith amongst a group of people known as the Hebrews, and they eventually came under Roman law and lived in the area known as Judea. Now, Christianity also began to flourish right around the early 1st century AD, and inspired by a religious teacher named Jesus Christ, who his followers believed he was the Son of God, and yet he also was God himself. And so initially the Romans were not Jews per se, or Christians, at least not in terms of the government. And very early on, the Christian church was heavily persecuted in Rome. Christ himself was crucified. Many of his followers, according to Jewish tradition, were also killed, particularly under Emperor Nero. They faced tremendous persecution. Peter was crucified upside down. The Apostle Paul was beheaded. Many other Christians were burned at the stake or sacrificed to lions. And that was all part of what went on in the early history of Christianity. But despite this persecution, it flourished largely because it was more personal than other Roman religion, and it offered salvation and a sense of community, and it appealed as well to the poor, because it was a religion for all classes. For example, Jesus had said, "The meek shall inherit the earth." So it had a clear appeal to those people that were not wealthy. And this brings us now to the Edict of Milan. Constantine became known as the first Christian emperor, and in 313 AD he issued the Edict of Milan, officially declaring tolerance of the Christian religion in the Roman Empire. So they went from being a religion that was officially persecuted under the Emperor Nero, but under Constantine, there's official government tolerance of the Christian religion. And then, in the late 4th century, Theodosius the Great established Christianity as the official state religion. And so it kind of came full circle. From being this religion that was persecuted, it became the official religion. And this brings us now to a look at the Christian church. As the Christian church grew, it established a hierarchy of the clergy, or people authorized to perform religious ceremonies. Each community had its own priest, and priest answered to bishops. Eventually, the Bishop of Rome, known as the Pope, emerged as the head of all bishops. And of course, that's still the basic structure of the Roman Catholic Church today. So looking at the medieval church, after the fall of the Roman Empire, disputes within the church led to a split within the church in 1054. The Eastern Church became known as the Orthodox Church, and it was the church in many nations, including Russia, Greece, Bulgaria, and Romania, a lot of Eastern Europe, and Greece for that matter. A good portion of what we now know as Eastern Europe, these nations have embraced the Orthodox faith. The Western Church was headed by the Pope and became known as the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church came to be a powerful force in Western Europe, and the clergy came to be very powerful and often wealthy. Now we're going to look at the Middle Ages and beyond. And this brings us to Charlemagne, king of the Franks. He was crowned the first Roman emperor since 476 by Pope Leo III, whose power was besieged by rebellious Romans. A new civilization emerged in Europe during the Middle Ages, from about 500 AD to about 1500, that blended the Roman legacy with Germanic traditions and the influence of the Christian Church. At this time, the primary social structure or hierarchical structure was one of feudalism. Under feudalism, a powerful group of nobles dominated political, social, and economic life of European society. Now we look at England. In 1066, William the Conqueror defeated King Harold, the Anglo-Saxon king, and in doing so, he became the king of a combined Anglo-Saxon/Norman England. Under Henry II, common law that was common to everyone in the kingdom, began to replace local law codes. And then we had the Magna Carta. In 1215, a group of nobles forced King John to sign the Magna Carta. The charter limited the power of the king and provided the basis of due process, or the right to a proper trial for the accused. And that's really what's very significant about the Magna Carta. Much of the elements of the Magna Carta ended up being repealed, but its lasting impact is that this really is the first time we saw a limit placed on the power of government, in particular the king. And like I said, it provided the process, or provided the basis of the concept of due process, having the right to a proper trial if you're accused. Then we saw the formation of Parliament. During the reign of Edward I, which began in 1272, Parliament emerged as a force largely in response to Edward's plans to unite England, Wales, and Scotland under his rule by force. The formation of Parliament was an important step in the process of self-government. It evolved into two houses, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Then we look at the High Middle Ages, from about 1000 to 1300. During the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, the population of Europe exploded. Monasteries spread across Europe, making the church a large part of the lives of peasants. During this period, the great Italian city-states emerged, the Crusades took place, and the philosophy of scholasticism grew under thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, and most of the notable Gothic cathedrals were built. Then we head into the Reformation. In 1517, Martin Luther published the 95 Theses, questioning many of the teachings of the Catholic Church. The original intent was to reform the Catholic Church, but it eventually led to the Protestant Reformation. Instead of just the church being reformed, it actually ended up leading to a split, which is why now you have some churches that are known, of course, as Catholic, and then you have other Christian churches that are known as Protestant. Those are basically sects of the church that split off from the Roman Catholic Church. The Reformation led to a split in the church into the Catholic and Protestant churches, and soon there were splits in the new Protestant church, and a series of religious wars followed. The religious wars finally ended in 1648 with a series of treaties that became known as the Peace of Westphalia.